Thanks for joining us today as part of what I think will be a very fruitful discussion on healthcare innovation. My name is Dan Rogers. I'm the Head of Education in Tangent, Trinity's Ideas Workspace. I am responsible for the accredited and professional education programs within the Innovation Hub at Trinity, which is Tangent. The purpose of the discussion today, we're going to explore the fascinating world of healthcare innovation with specific reference to disruption and bottom-up disruption specifically. So we're going to talk about that from a number of angles. I'm delighted to welcome two guests today. We've got Dr. Michael Toomey, who is the Senior Clinical Research Manager at the Health Innovation Hub Ireland. And we've got Dr. Alison Keogh, who is Assistant Professor in Clinical Medicine at Trinity and also who delivers Module 3 of the Tangent PG Search in Healthcare Innovation. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Might just start by asking you both just to give a kind of a snapshot of your background. That'd be really helpful, just to give a little bit of context. I might come to yourself first, Alison, if that's okay.
Sure. I am a physiotherapist by background. Completed a PhD in behavior change and then worked for a number of years as a postdoctoral researcher in digital health in the Insight Centre for Data Analytics. And for the last 12 months, I've been an assistant professor in healthcare innovation here in Trinity College in the School of Medicine. My area of research is predominantly in wearables and in mobile applications for, I suppose, the remote monitoring of health, with a specific interest in patient and public involvement. And I'm the academic lead of a postgraduate diploma in healthcare innovation. And then, as you said there, Dan, the academic lead for Module 3 in the certificate.
Super. Thanks very much, Alison. And we'll talk a little bit more in more detail about those programs maybe as we go through the discussion. And Michael, yourself.
Hi, everybody. Delighted to be here today. Yeah, I suppose I started off as a biochemist, would you believe? Then I got interested in technology and I did computer science in UCC. From there, I was a computer consultant. I set up my own company back in 2003. Sold that in 2015. That was in the IT area. During that, I suppose, part of my life, I also did cloud strategy and innovation up in the Irish Management Institute. That led on to a master's in data business. And from that, as if that wasn't enough, I did a PhD in information systems in UCC, focusing in the area of digital health. And I'm currently the Senior Clinical Research Manager in the Health Innovation Hub Ireland. And I also lead the clinical evaluations project within there. So that's kind of a whistle stop of my own journey.
Super. Thanks, Michael. Sucker for punishment with the courses and qualifications, sounds like.
That's it. A bit of a glutton for punishment.
Great stuff. So today we're talking about positive disruption and healthcare innovation. So maybe we might just start by talking specifically and maybe defining what we mean by positive disruption. So I guess in terms of it's a term that's bandied about quite a bit in the context of innovation is disruption and positive disruption. So in this context, we're specifically talking about innovation changes and practices that challenge, I suppose, the existing status quo and things that would lead to improvements in patient care, perhaps cost efficiencies, perhaps improvement in the overall healthcare system and delivery of healthcare nationally. When we talk about bottom-up, so bottom-up disruption, we're specifically talking about emphasizing, I suppose, the vital role that individuals within this system play, and individuals at all levels and all roles within the healthcare system. So this can include things like grassroots initiatives, various sort of players from those that are directly involved in healthcare delivery from a medical perspective, but also the administrative staff have just as much of a role in sort of reshaping the kinds of innovations that can happen within healthcare. So as a sector, it faces multiple challenges. And I think innovation is really key, I suppose, to addressing many of them. And it's on that basis, like I think that we might seek to approach this discussion. So maybe to talk in the first instance about some examples of bottom-up innovations in healthcare that have had a significant impact on improving patient outcomes. I might come to you on this, Michael. could you maybe talk about, from your own experience or examples that you're aware of, any specific innovations that you've come across that you think have led to improved patient outcomes, or have made significant improvements within the healthcare system more broadly?
Yeah, I'm seeing this more and more in a number of different areas. I suppose you have those that are on the fringes that are, shall we say, within the swamp, those that are facing the challenges every day. And I'm seeing a lot of this activity with the likes of speech and language therapists, with physios. One of the projects that comes to mind that I'm working currently is with a company called Teletherapy. And what they've done, they've developed a digital therapeutic to aid those aphasic patients, you know, in terms of recovery or indeed maintaining their voices. Very, very smart little device. It's basically an app, but it gets them to train their voices, you know, keeping that muscle memory going, etc. And I suppose trying to address the difficulty that these patients have on a daily basis. But what we're seeing is very impactful in terms of the patients not having to actually go physically into the hospital as much. They can do a lot of the exercises at home, but equally the speech and language therapist can assess the patient in real time, can go in and get that kind of data-driven insight to, I suppose, do precision type therapy with the patient. And that's just one area that I'm working on at the moment that's fascinating. And there's spin-offs in terms of other impacts it's having, in terms of if the speech and language therapist isn't having to go out to the patient's home, that we're seeing reduction in the use of diesel or petrol as well. So there's a contribution there in terms of the environment as well. So that's one example. I suppose what we are seeing as well is a lot of patient-led innovations. You know, those patients that are living with their conditions and are looking at situations they face on a day-to-day basis. It could be in terms of symptom tracking. You know, those patients that are arriving into medical appointments and they're being asked questions about their medications, their history, and solutions that are being developed to aid those. One solution that comes to mind is a solution called Friendo, which is in the area of femtech, or female health and wellness. And the person there is actually a patient of endometriosis themselves, and was faced with this issue of the challenges of diagnosing this condition, and is now looking to try to capture the symptoms as an aid to a diagnostics, but equally in terms of, I suppose, being able to look at the efficacy of therapies within that area. So we're seeing a lot of activity, and it's wonderful to see.
Super. That's some two really nice examples there, Michael. Just I suppose in the context of healthcare within the community and patients, you know, in scenarios where patients don't necessarily have to come into the hospital or the healthcare setting, I suppose digital technology can really help with that. And I wonder, like, have we seen particular trends over the last decade where digital health technology specifically, and maybe telemedicine, have taken off, and have they empowered individuals or communities to take control of their own healthcare? And how does this relate to any innovation that's happening in a healthcare setting? Alison?
Yeah, I think the promise and the potential of remote monitoring is absolutely huge. The use of, even from a basic component, you know, wearable fitness trackers is now quite ubiquitous across a lot of people, regardless of age. So I think people are becoming more aware of various aspects of their health, and are certainly very accepting of the fact that they can track different aspects of their health and gather information for themselves. You know, blood pressure monitors, glucose monitors. There's an awful lot of devices now that are, I suppose, putting a little bit of empowerment within patients' hands, you know, across many different cohorts. I think the continued issue and where we probably need further innovation is understanding how to, I suppose, operationalize them and get all these different devices and softwares speaking to each other, and not only speaking to each other, but speaking to, you know, the patient's overall record. I suppose one of the things that we don't want is someone having to come in with multiple different devices to their clinic to show a clinician how they've been getting on. The ideal is that we will reach a point in time where you might get triggered to have a call from your healthcare professional, or that you know yourself when you do need to have an appointment based on your data. There are certain companies that are starting to do that. At the moment, they're primarily based within the US, and I think that's probably due to the healthcare model there. But you can see that they're starting to use data to, like that, call someone and say, how are you feeling? We've seen some very good research in the area of heart failure, in chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, where you're potentially preventing people from needing to come into the clinic, from being able to look at their data and say, oh, actually, no, you're okay. Let me know if something gets worse or whatever. So the potential is huge. I think we're at this cusp now where we need to figure out how to implement them effectively across various different health services.
That's really interesting. There seems to be so many health-related apps available and so many different technologies that it seems we're not short on technological innovations, but it sounds like actually having them integrated in some way, and maybe talking to each other, as you say, and communicating, or at least sharing information with the patient's record. What do you think is needed, Alison, or like what would help that kind of integration to happen, do you think?
It's a little bit tricky, I suppose. I mean, from an Irish perspective, the one thing we need is an electronic healthcare record and patient ID. Without that, clinics, doctors, different departments can't speak to each other, never mind the actual devices themselves. Then what we need is software that then integrates into these systems, or we need consumer devices that will easily transfer data in a usable format to doctors and other healthcare professionals. There's obviously, I suppose, an element of privacy that comes into this, so it does get a little bit complicated, but at the very, very least, as a patient, I should be able to share, if I want, my Fitbit data, for example, with my doctor. And right now, I can't currently do that in an electronic way. So we need those patient IDs to get up and running sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely, makes sense. So I suppose with the technology, there's lots of potential for innovation, but I suppose we're not there yet in terms of that integration. Are there other kinds of barriers, I suppose, that present in terms of innovation in a healthcare setting, Michael? Are there things that, there's potential for change or challenging the sort of status quo? There are just barriers in place, be they cultural, be they technological. What are the kinds of barriers that you've come across, and are there kind of proposals or suggestions as to how we might overcome some of them?
I think that when you look at healthcare, and you get a lot of bad press around the area, to be fair, but it is very, very complex in many regards. It's your kind of wicked problem kind of thing. There's so many different facets to it. You look at the technology, and the technology isn't everything. In actual fact, it's only part of the whole, I suppose, systems thinking, we call it. You need to be very much aware of the people, understand those people, their needs, their nuances, their quirks, their beliefs, their behaviors, and then, of course, the process. Understanding the existing process and how we're going to mold that process to accommodate and appropriately the technology solutions we're bringing in needs a lot of consideration. And therefore, at the center of it becomes communication, effective communication, collaboration, and going out there, which a lot of people, talk about, but they don't do. And I see this in companies outside of healthcare, going out there, getting your boots dirty and interacting with those that have the need, understanding that with any problem, it's multifaceted in terms of the stakeholders involved. Who are they? How do they experience the problem? Okay. And then when we're talking about the solution, what is their perception of value? In terms of the solution we're delivering. So it's a journey. It's not easy, but I suppose if it was, we'd all be unicorns. you know, but that is not the reality. The reality is it's tough. It takes a lot of grit and determination and a real sense of looking at things through different lenses.
Great. I suppose what I'm hearing is you're talking a bit about a human-centered innovation there. It's great to hear you talk about, I suppose, understanding people's needs, pains, gains, behaviors, attitudes, motivations. I suppose, how can we expect to innovate on a problem unless we're trying to put ourselves in the shoes of those experiencing it? And it is, I guess, a key focus of the course in healthcare innovation that we deliver in Trinity and Tangent, is that sort of understanding of innovation as a human-centered process, so that, you know, just as you said, tech isn't everything. In fact, tech is probably a sort of tool, if anything, to enable some of the solutions, but it's not the solution in and of itself. So we mentioned patient-led innovation earlier. I thought that was really interesting, and maybe as a follow-on to that, I suppose patient advocacy and engagement, they're critical components of this kind of positive disruption that we're talking about. How can healthcare providers and policymakers maybe better involve the patients and their voices in shaping some of the healthcare innovations of the future, Alison?
I think traditionally we've relied on, if anything, asking for patients' opinions in a quite a participatory level, like surveys, interviews, that kind of thing. And while they absolutely have a place, they're only one part of the puzzle. If we're going to involve people, we need to involve them. They need to have a seat right alongside researchers, right alongside developers, directing where the research is going. So what is the question that's important to them? What is the main aspect of their healthcare problem that impacts their day-to-day lives? Just because we can measure something doesn't mean that we should. And it's only really by speaking to them and having them on your team as equal partners that we can actually start to direct this. And we have a really wonderful opportunity at the moment, because we have a paradigm shift effectively in how healthcare is going to be delivered in the future. And up until now, healthcare has been quite paternalistic, whereas right now we have the option of saying, what is it that you want? We probably have the technology somewhere that we can develop for this, but how does it need to work? How does it need to fit into your daily lives? How do you need that information spread back to you? How do you need it to be shared? What are you willing to share? All these big questions we can't assume. And I think one of the issues is that we continue to assume it. We might look at literature and surveys and that kind of thing, but it's really not enough. Now, you can see patient groups. IPOSI have a wonderful system here in Ireland where they basically do matchmaking. So if you're a researcher or you're a company and you're looking to, really start to develop something alongside patients, then they can match you with the patient advocacy group or patient experts who are used to it being involved, I suppose, in research and in development programs, and make sure that you're matched to the right people. So really, I think we need to start being aware that this is absolutely critical, and then start reaching out to the systems and the structures that are already there, and really start implementing it in what we do.
Great. And I suppose there might be people listening out there who are working within a healthcare setting, and there maybe they see opportunities for innovation, and they really are looking to have some kind of influence in that space. Any advice for somebody who's working in a healthcare setting and wants to sort of influence healthcare providers, maybe also policymakers around some of this? What would be logical steps for them, do you think?
In terms of patient involvement, sorry.
Patient involvement, or how would they go about? So I'm working in a healthcare setting. I've got lots of ideas in terms of process improvement, innovations. What are the kinds of things that I could potentially do to maybe have my ideas heard, or to have some sort of influence and impact?
I think that's probably one of the key outcomes of this course is understanding what is the message that you're trying to get out there and to whom. So for example, one of the key assignments that we do in module 3 at the end is a pitch. And that sounds quite businessy in nature, but if you're looking to affect change, you need to convince somebody that your idea is good. So, what is the background? What is the problem you're trying to solve? Why are you the person that's going to solve it? And communicating that in a really effective way, so that people listen to you for a few minutes and then go, let's set up a meeting afterwards. That sounds interesting. So I think it's about kind of having the confidence and the skills to know what it is that you need to say and to who you need to say it to, is one of the key things here. Because particularly if we work in healthcare, it would be remiss of us to turn around and say we expect everybody to be able to develop an app or a new device or something like that on their own. You need a team, but actually if you have the vision, and you know what needs to be done, and you have a plan in terms of how it can be done, then you're probably the person to lead it, even if you may not create it as such. So it's really putting that, I suppose, power into people's hands, that they have the confidence to say, I have an idea, I have a plan about how to put it in place, I've done my background work, come with me on this journey. So it's really about selling yourself and the idea that you have.
Great. Yeah, and absolutely. I suppose on the program there is a lot of opportunity to do that, I suppose, in a bit of a safe space, and get some feedback on, your ability to communicate and articulate your ideas around innovation in an influential manner. But as you say, you've got to be able to convince people at the end of the day. And if you're not working within a culture where that's conducive to innovation, then you really need to maybe go out and start developing that culture yourself. Yeah, that takes a certain level of confidence to be able to do that. Michael, maybe talk to us a little bit about the importance of equity and inclusivity in healthcare access and outcomes. So if we're proposing bottom-up sort of disruption and solutions for, to problems that we think innovation can solve, how can we also maybe ensure that we promote equity and inclusivity in terms of these solutions?
I think that goes back to, again, the stakeholder analysis. As I said, we started an initiative called Femtech Ireland, focusing on women's health and wellness. And I suppose the reason we started that is we start to engage internationally with others that appreciated the neglect, and that's a word that I wouldn't use too often, but the neglect of women's health and wellness, which should never be the case. But even within women's health, we must appreciate that there's all different people, from different demographics, different race, different cultures, and therefore, to make it inclusive and fair, we must consider all these stakeholders. And that's very important. So when we talk about design and innovation design, we must appreciate it through the lens of ethics and ethical design. Are we inclusive of everyone? Is there anyone that is being excluded? Are we being fair? Is it equitable? So we must start to challenge our own beliefs and our own biases, and start to do our research in a more engaging way and more collaborative way. So that can be done very much by, I suppose, engaging with others and understanding. And understanding is key. For me, I think that is probably one of our challenges that we have, is perhaps literacy in several areas. We talk about health literacy and patients, but equally perhaps digital and data literacy within the clinical profession, and what can it enable. But equally, I suppose, design literacy, ethics literacy, to really challenge ourselves in terms of, are we delivering solutions that are ethical? And indeed, and this is something that really, I suppose, is a bugbear I have, we have a lot of technologies that have been released into society that are now ubiquitous, and we're looking to put Pandora back in the box, the unintended consequences. So when we look at design of solutions and we're thinking about the intended ones, are we thinking about the unintended consequences? We see this in, for instance, drones. They can be used very, very effectively in delivering healthcare to remote communities for surveillance of certain things, which can be very positive. But then negatively, we can see they can be, and you just point to the example, perhaps, of Dublin Airport, where they can be very disruptive in a negative way, but equally could be used to assassinate someone. So I think that when we are designing, when we're innovating, we need to be very much put on our hats that challenge the way we think, challenge our mindsets, and really make sure that our designs are ethical and inclusive and that no one is being excluded. For instance, is something that comes to mind now during COVID, the oximeter that was used pervasively was found to be problematic in the area of usage by women and people of coloured skin. It was designed very much with white male Caucasians. Women have narrower fingers than men, and equally people of coloured skin, it didn't work as effectively as it should. So you have to ask yourself, how did that get through the system in terms of regulation? You know, so I think we need to box a lot more clever in terms of the way we go about our design and the ethics therein.
Yeah, fascinating. And I guess having a diverse as possible group within that sort of stakeholder consultation around any new product, service, or innovation is essential to ensure that you're getting that level of equity and inclusivity in terms of the perspectives that feed into to any possible solution. Really interesting the comment about the drone. I mean, in some ways, AI it's similar in the sense that it has just been unleashed. When we think of how the internet came about so gradually in terms of access, as well as speed, as well as it becoming more sophisticated over time, it feels a little bit like AI has just sort of landed on our doorstep, and there's many unintended consequences that we don't yet know of, or as of yet are unaware of. And certainly in an educational context, it's throwing up all kinds of challenges in terms of assessment and evaluating sort of student outcomes. But I imagine we probably have more to see in a healthcare setting and in terms of unintended consequences there as well.
Hugely in the area of AI, if we're going to use solutions that are AI driven, perhaps Ashley or Alison was talking about these large data sets we're going to be getting. So the analysis of them through the algorithms, those algorithms have to be tested with the data sets that are representative of the intended users. Otherwise, you could arrive at a situation where a clinician is using some kind of a solution for augmented decision making, and if you're making decisions that could be life or death, you need to make sure that you can trust the algorithm, so trust is at the center of a lot of these solutions we're going to be looking at. You need to believe they work, because if you don't, what happens is suddenly you get a change in behavior in terms of the users who say, I don't trust that, so I'm not going to use it. And that becomes problematic in and of itself.
Yeah, you don't get the adherence. Data, I suppose, plays an enormous role because the security of data, personal data particularly, is essential and hugely important in a healthcare setting. Is this something, I suppose, that hinders innovation, or are there things that we can do to, I suppose, harness data? Does data get in the way of innovation and data protection, or is it something that we just have to harness differently, particularly in the context of patient-driven initiatives or digital health solutions? Would you have any thoughts on that, Alison?
I think if you ask patients, a lot of them will be willing to share quite a lot of health data with researchers, with various different healthcare professionals. What they're not willing to do is share their data for advertising. And I think at the moment, if we want to call it a hindrance, the hindrance is potentially this kind of argument, if you want to call it like that, between, we'll say, companies who are trying to develop solutions that and then sell them to people at various different levels. Who owns that data? And then what can be done with that data and to whom? So if the company owns it, technically, they could sell it on to someone else. And there's a lot of fear, particularly around the area of health insurance in the future, that, you know, again, we talk about unintended consequences. If you go and get one of these genetic kind of analysis tests, are you now going to be liable in the future if that health data ends up in the hands of your insurer through some way or other? We've seen a couple of papers recently that even de-identified data from wearables can be quite easily re-identified. And I think, you know, as researchers, probably, I wouldn't necessarily see it as a hindrance, but I would see it that we have an obligation to make sure that we don't push on so quickly trying to find a solution that works, that we forget about the potential unintended consequences, the equity of these different solutions and who has access to them, what it means for different people at different stages. And I suppose those big questions that really no one has the answer to yet. But I think we have to stop at a certain point and say, what is it that we're actually looking to do here and who's benefiting from it? So I wouldn't see it as a hindrance, but I would see it as something that we have a responsibility to manage. And I think in the future, that's probably going to be our stumbling block if we don't manage it. So some big questions in the future.
And presumably that's fascinating about the wearables. So potentially there are issues over the anonymity of the data that is generated by the wearables. Is that correct? And that potentially that might impact people's willingness to use them?
And look, a lot of patients, particularly if you interview them, will say, I've got nothing to hide. And they may not, right? So no one's suggesting that someone has something to hide. But again, if we know that your location data plus all the other bits and pieces can then, again, potentially tell advertisers or health insurance that now you're more likely to require XYZ in terms of drugs in the future, or, you know, other types of things that we haven't yet seen where that leads to, I think is the problem. So right now, people might say, I don't care if you know that I've gone to Tesco at 10 o'clock this morning. But, you know, we've seen things recently where, you know, they might be kind of clickbait stories, but where Netflix was able to, you know, say that someone was bisexual before they even realized it themselves. Or we see Tesco being able to tell that someone is pregnant before they realize it themselves, simply because of some of their spending habits. These are, you know, right now, 1 in a million type things. But in the future, they may not be unless we start to manage these things appropriately. So yeah, I think, again, it comes back to what Michael was saying about unintended consequences. The data on its own is not a problem. It's what we do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's such a topical area at the moment. Michael, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, just in relation to data and data security, I suppose one of the concerns, you know, should your data get out there? You know, so if there is a breach, such as what happened to the HSE there, you know, last year, one of the consequences that we have seen in the States, for instance, is identity theft. So someone impersonates you with various details, insurance details, etc., and they can actually get a medical procedure done using your details. You know, so this kind of identity theft thing is an issue, a real issue, and perhaps a discussion in and of itself. You know.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So maybe just moving on then, I wonder, are there any particular subsectors of the healthcare of the healthcare sector where we see more innovations, more bottom-up disruption that are particularly showing promising results? So obviously healthcare is just a very broad sector. Like, are there particular subsectors that are shining examples of where innovation is happening? And are there things that we can learn, you know, from some of this, Michael?
Yeah, I mentioned these two areas previously. It's something that I've seen within the Health Innovation Hub, is that some of the, I suppose, initiatives we have, you know, awards, and which would be very much like the Clinical Innovation Awards, which are trying to get people that are within healthcare to become innovators, or what we would sometimes might refer to as entrepreneurs. You know, they're those guys that are innovating on the fringes within an organization, but in this case, within the health system. And I was amazed during my time so far and in the Health Innovation Hub to see that within those kind of initiatives that we run, there seems to be an awful lot of activity within physios and speech and language therapists. You know, when they come across a problem, they're constantly looking to feed it or to fix it. and to overcome the problems that they have. It could be someone with an upper arm, issue, and or someone that has an ability to do something that we might take for granted, for instance, cutting a piece of bread or cutting a pizza. These people just seem to avoid letting things get in their way. They're very patient focused. They can see, we talk about empathy and design thinking. These people seem to me to be very empathetic, but very driven to create change and to disrupt, and they innovate around the fringes. And we see an awful lot of activity with these people, And I suppose the other people, our cohort that I mentioned previously, was the patients themselves, especially in the femtech area. Most of the CEOs of the founders of those companies are patients, that are sick of, I suppose, being shoehorned into solutions that exist, and that have had enough of dealing with the issue they face on a daily basis and want to do something about it.
They're probably the best people to identify opportunities because they're experiencing the problem
very often, but nevertheless we would challenge them in relation to their own bias, because it's very important to appreciate that even as a patient, our health journey is our own.
Sure.
It's not representative of every other patient, so we would actively encourage them to validate their perception of the problem, but equally their solution, with other patients, with others. And that's I think one of the key things of innovation is to challenge yourself, challenge your bias, and go out there, interact within the ecosystem with other patients, with other clinicians, with other stakeholders, to really get that evidence that shows that you're addressing a real need.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to pause for a second because I see there's a couple of questions that have just come in. I just want to see if we can answer any of them. So first one from Noreen, this question to Michael. I think, Michael, this is in relation to some of the examples of innovations that you mentioned earlier on in the discussion. The question is, have the examples led to better patient outcomes? And it says, excellent presentation. So I'm not sure, in terms of the innovative outcomes, is there a metric, or how can we demonstrate, I suppose, that there has been better patient outcomes in relation to some of those examples mentioned?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things we do in the hub, especially within pilots, is the whole design of the pilot. What does success look like through the various stakeholders? And that becomes very important, because equally, very often we have to appreciate that the person that might be paying for the solution, especially in a healthcare setting, could be very different from the person that's using the solution. So it's to box really clever and appreciate what in the design, what do we need to measure that's going to be important to gather that evidence for those stakeholders. So in the case of the teletherapy solution, it was looking at it through the eyes of the patient, the benefits to the patient in terms of maintaining or bettering their voice capabilities, but equally empowering the patient to be more proactive within their own management of the condition, and equally, allowing a patient to stay at home and do a lot of their exercises at home. So they might be small things to many people, but they're very impactful for patients. That concept of empowerment and bringing them that on journey, but appreciating that every patient is at a different stage in their care, and I suppose their sense of their ability to manage their condition more. So you have to bring them on that journey as well. Other solutions could be, I think the Friendo solution is quite interesting. The gathering of symptoms, which is one of the data points that perhaps is often not as good as we'd like it to be. So take yourself as a clinician, you're trying to make a diagnosis, but there's perhaps a data quality issue. So if we can provide patients with a solution that aids them to capture symptoms in real time, then when they're reporting that within the medical appointment or medical consultation, the data quality is better. That aids the clinician in terms of the diagnosis. Or it could be evaluating a therapeutic by gathering those symptoms as they start to use the therapeutic. But appreciating that these are just, many data points that a clinician would use, or indeed a patient themselves, because patients want to understand their own condition, how it's evolving,
Yep.
how it's
Yep.
progressing, so.
Very good. So we've a couple of other questions that are just specifically in relation to the course. So what I might do is just to talk very briefly about the PG cert at this point in the conversation. Question: I'm from Ethiopia, graduate of medicine, currently working in digital health as a medical consultant. I'm interested in taking the course, but the course is only given for those living in Ireland. How can I participate as an international student? So in a nutshell, and I'll talk about the course specifically in a moment, but it is a HEA Springboard Plus funded program. So it is available to those resident in Ireland at the moment. So in order to there is some eligibility criteria. However, if you want to participate as a non-Springboard student and you are in a position to attend the course, probably best to get in touch with us directly. So that would be at springboard@tcd.ie would be the email to get in touch, and we'll provide some details in the chat for you to follow up directly with us. So in Tangent, we have a postgraduate certificate in healthcare innovation. It's a level 9 qualification on the National Framework for Qualifications. It's a 310 credit module program, and it takes place over roughly about 3 months. It's starting in January of next year. Closing date is late November of this year. We have about 35 places available. Signups have already begun. So it is something, if you are interested to sort of get in touch with us and begin your application as soon as possible. We have, as I mentioned, 3 modules. The first module is largely looking at innovation and creativity within a healthcare context. So looking at some of what we've discussed earlier around user-centered design, design thinking, empathy maps, customer journey mapping, that sort of thing. And then the second module is around opportunity generation and recognition in a healthcare context. So specifically looking at how do we think more like entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, and how do we, I suppose, identify opportunities for innovation within a healthcare setting, and what are the kind of tools and techniques that we might avail of in order to realize some of those opportunities, and how do we build, I suppose, some elements of confidence around communicating some of the ideas. And then the last module, and maybe actually I'll come to you, Alison, to tell us about the last module, because you're better positioned to talk about it than me. Enterprise development in healthcare.
Yeah, so I suppose kind of touching on what I said earlier, while we're looking at enterprise development, I mean, that kind of sends you down the what do you need to start up, we'll say a startup, in terms of, again, understanding your unique selling point, understanding the type of team you need behind you, some of the financing models, what your payment and revenue streams will be. So we kind of touch on that, which can sound a little bit intimidating to start with, particularly for people from a healthcare background that may not be used to that kind of thing. But effectively what we're doing is developing the idea into a pitch. So some people have done process innovations rather than actually looking at developing companies or things like that. The end goal is what we want is that what you should be communicating to people in order to get your idea out there, and that you have the confidence and the skills in order to develop a deck effectively that will allow you to do that, so that when you go out back into the real world, that you have a template that you have had good peer review feedback on, and that you can build further on from there.
Super. Thanks, Alison. It's probably important to mention as well that it's not necessary to come to this course with a business idea or a preconceived innovation. Great if you are coming with some of that, but it's not necessary, and a lot of that can emerge during your journey on the program. I've just shared a link to the program detail in the chat, so if anybody wants to follow that, there's also a brochure link there, and opportunity to get in touch and ask any questions via the email and contact information that's on there as well. So in terms of the closing date for applications, it's the 22nd of November, and the course begins on the 29th of January. It is a blended course, so it's part in person and part online. I think about 60-40, so 60% in person, 40% online, and it takes place on in person on site at Trinity in Tangent, which is on the first floor of the Trinity Business School. Very good. So just as we're kind of coming around to our conclusion, maybe I'll just come to Michael and Alison and ask you guys to tell me a little bit about what you're excited about for the future. So are there emerging trends or technologies that you think are going to, create this sort of positive disruption within the healthcare? Are there things coming down the tracks that you just particularly excited about, particularly interested in, things that we should look out for over the next sort of 5 to 10 year period? Maybe come to yourself first, Michael.
I think what excites me is something that Alison mentioned is more systems thinking, the integration of systems, and how when at the moment we have all these silos of data, when we have it in one place and then we apply the questioning via algorithms of that data, what insights we might get for the one patient, but equally, which is going to drive more precision-based medicine and treatments, but equally the larger cohort, we call it, might be in an appropriate term, but the herd, what insights can we get so that we can advance treatments, not only in terms of, and we're seeing this with even generative AI, how we're able to look at generating perhaps new proteins, new therapies in ways that we haven't thought of before. But equally as much as AI and this excites me, it also concerns me that we perhaps may not look at the unintended consequences. And therefore, while people often look at regulation and governance as a hindrance to innovation, and sometimes I would be in that camp, because I think you have to be pragmatic as well in the way we approach things. I think that it is exciting, but it's also something that we need to be very, very careful of, because we don't want to create further inequity. We don't want to create solutions that are anyway discriminatory. And I suppose the other thing that I would be excited about is, here we are, and I'm in Cork, sitting in Rochestown. You're people from all over the country and perhaps in other countries, but how now with the technologies that we're using, how we can collaborate better. And I think the concept of open innovation and disruption, we have to appreciate better collaboration. Now, that can often be problematic and challenging when we look at intellectual property and patents and protection, but nevertheless, we have to appreciate that, not all the smart guys work for us, so to speak. We have to collaborate. It's only by collective mindsets that we can advance medicine to where we want to go. So I think that's exciting. I think the other areas perhaps would be virtual reality, augmented reality, and extended reality, and how we can use those. And we're seeing, therapies advancing in those regards. For instance, I was over at the VR for Rehab conference in Amsterdam recently, and virtual reality is only an enabler, but this company had developed this very, very clever software, to get people to do physio on upper limbs. And I have a slight impingement here in this shoulder, and I was doing the exercise and it actually detected that this arm was not as mobile as this one. So it started to automatically give me exercises to get this arm working. So that was the intelligence that was built into this device. Now that's very, very exciting, and I was saying, wow, but I mean, the whole area of quantum computing and how that's going to facilitate, faster analysis of data, so we are in, this new era, but nevertheless, we need to be cautious at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. The rate, I suppose, of development of technology can often drive things in a particular direction. But as you say, we need to be ensuring that we are doing that in a human and patient-centered way. Yeah. I can certainly see a huge evolution in terms of technology, AI, VR, AR, as you mentioned, in the next few years. And that's fascinating that that technology was able to detect and advise you in terms of exercises to improve.
Yeah, the exercises changed as I was doing them because it detected this.
Wow, interesting. Alison, what about you? What's exciting in the next kind of 5 to 10 years?
I probably echo a lot of what Michael has said, to be honest. I think you know, the potential in terms of diagnosis of AI is absolutely massive. You've got an area of robotics again that is potentially life-changing for people with you know, spinal cord injuries or missing limbs. You know, it's the possibilities are endless, really. As I said, we're probably not at the stage here where we're worried that the technology can't keep up. It's what we use it for. And I think I'd probably again echo some of what Michael has said. I think there's now an increasing awareness, even if it's not fully there yet, but I would hope in the next 5 to 10 years of making sure that we are including everybody in the conversation. You see more and more consortiums being funded with hundreds of millions of euro that are including patients, researchers, data engineers, healthcare professionals, industry partners, because I think there's an understanding that we work better together and can solve it. No one domain will solve it on its own. So by working together, we can definitely make more strides. So I think seeing that is probably the big thing, because by doing that, you're more likely to have something that ends up being implementable at the end. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So a systems thinking approach that is collaborative and probably cross-disciplinary by the sounds of things is something that's going to yield an exciting future in the healthcare innovation space. Very good. Well, we're just coming close to time, so I just wanted to really say thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Michael, for your time today, and what's been a really insightful discussion. Thank you, everybody who has attended today. Thank you for your questions and comments. If you'd like to know more about healthcare innovation, probably a good next step would be to consider signing up for the postgraduate certificate in healthcare innovation, which is taking place at Tangent, Trinity's Ideas Workspace. It will be happening in January of next year. So the 29th of January is when it kicks off. However, the closing date for applications is the 22nd of November. So it's important to get your applications in as soon as possible. You can go directly to the springboardcourses.ie website and input search for healthcare innovation or search for TCD and you'll find the program. If any questions, just contact springboard@tcd.ie and we can help you through the application process. So once again, thank you very much to our panelists today. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Michael. Great to have your insights, expertise, experience and input. And I wish you guys a great day and we'll chat again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great stuff, guys. So I'm not sure, I'm just in touch with Ritvi about ending the stream. So I'm going to end the call just to end the stream as well. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Really appreciate your time, guys.
See you.
Take care.
Bye.
Be in touch. Bye-bye.